We're going to start in 10 minutes. Sorry about the delay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. On behalf of Susan's family, Mrs. Eng, her siblings, Rose, Henry, and Victor, we sincerely thank you for taking the time to come out on this Sunday to celebrate a truly remarkable Canadian. Just to start off with a quick land acknowledgement. We are grateful to be living and working in the traditional territory of many nations, which include the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We are in the home of many diverse First Nations, including Inuit and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Thank you also, actually a really big thanks to Mayor Olivia Chow for this unique celebration of life in the council chambers of City Hall. I can't think of a more fitting place to honor Susan. This is, of course, the heart of civic democracy, where ideas about how we should treat each other are discussed every day. And there was no better social justice champion than Susan Eng. I'm Tony Wong, a friend of Susan's. I first knew her as a young reporter at the Toronto Star. My office was back there. And later as a friend. We all know Susan had an incredible resume, of course. She was the first Chinese Canadian to chair the Toronto Police Services Board, which is responsible for the oversight of police. She was one of the first Chinese Canadian women to be a partner in a major Canadian law firm. She helped to form the Chinese Canadian National Council, where she fought for head tax redress. She was foundational in the origin of the Yihong nursing homes. And she was an advocate for seniors as the vice president at the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. But it's not just her resume that was special, of course, it was her humanity. She was a formidable force for good. As a journalist, I always admired Susan's ability to ask the tough questions. But I will personally remember her not just for her dedication to fighting injustice, but for her wicked sense of humor, and also her ability to laugh, especially when things got tough. And they did, but she never wavered, and she changed how we police, how we govern, and how we view ourselves as Canadians. You'll hear more today from an impressive lineup of speakers who are all change makers in their own right. And that's starting with Mayor Olivia Chow.
Good afternoon, everyone. We gathered here today with heavy hearts, but also with immense gratitude. Gratitude for the life, the work, and the unwavering spirit of our dear friend and fierce champion, Susan Eng. Susan was a trailblazer, not just because she was often the first to do something, but because she opened the door wide for others to follow. She believed in public services, not just as a title, not for prestige, but as a duty. When she served as the chair of the Toronto Police Service Board, she brought integrity, determination, and an unshakable sense of justice to every decision. She advanced the more than policing strategy, pushing for accountability, transparency, and civilian oversight long before these were popular ideas. She did not shy away from the hard conversations. She leaned in, always. So how did she understand the needs of people so deeply? Because she listened. She cared. She knew that justice wasn't just a word. It was how you treat people, how service was delivered, how governments show up or didn't for the communities. She knew that quality mattered, that fairness mattered. Whether it was in City Hall, in a community meeting, at a police service board meeting, or in quiet moments of mentorship, Susan always demanded better, and she delivered better. I remember when the City of Toronto was building the first 911 multilingual services, a crucial change to make sure that the language was never a barrier for life-saving help. That movement had Susan's fingerprint all over it. She knew our city was multilingual, multicultural, and she made sure our institutions reflected that. Today, 911 dispatchers can speak hundreds of languages because of voices and the action that Susan Eng took. Quietly, sometimes not so quiet, powerful, absolutely persistent. Susan also brought her fire and brilliance to national efforts. She stood shoulder to shoulder with those of us fighting, many of you here, fighting for the redress and compensation and apology for the Chinese head tax and exclusion act. For 23 long years, she and all of us pushed. And Susan never wavered. Her political advice, her strategic mind, her resolve, all helped pave the way to that long overdue apology and compensation in the House of Commons. That moment belongs to many people, including some people in this room, but Susan was undeniably one of its architects. And her heart was as big as her mind. She supported the Yihong Foundation because she believed our seniors, our pioneers, deserve care, respect, and dignity. She advocated for equity and justice, not just in speeches, but in how she lived every single day and in all the board meetings through the years. Susan's contribution to the City of Toronto, to Canada, was enormous. We see it in policy and in institutions, in people, and today we pause to show our gratitude. We miss her voice, we miss her courage, we miss her friendship. But we carry her legacy forward. Every time we stand up for justice, speak out for fairness, or push our city to be more inclusive, more just, Susan is with us. So thank you, Susan. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your strength.
Thank you, Mayor Chow, and also for continuing Susan's legacy. She'd probably also appreciate the fact that speed cameras do work. No, we're not getting political here. Susan would get political, but we're not getting political. But as former chair of the police commission, she would have agreed with you. Okay, we have a CBC newsreel It's an archival clip about Susan.
Susan Eng, a Toronto-born lawyer, activist, and former head of the Toronto Police Services Board, has passed away at the age of 72. A trailblazer in more ways than one, she remains to this day the only Chinese-Canadian woman to be appointed to the TPS board. Now, the Weingarten has more on Eng's impact that stretched far beyond our city.
Known as a force to be reckoned with.
There are a lot of people who think I don't keep my place very well, and it's too bad for them.
As well as a trailblazer and loyal friend. These are just some of the ways people describe Susan Eng. Coming from humble beginnings, Eng grew up peeling potatoes in her father's restaurant, watching him sew his Chinese head tax certificates to his undergarment for fear of getting deported, and decided it was time for a change.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brown.
After being told she'd make a good secretary, she instead went on to become a lawyer, later getting into politics, eventually becoming chair of the Toronto Police Service Board, the first and only Chinese-Canadian woman to be in the role to this day.
They were battles. They were really some tough on battles on the 7th floor of the police headquarters. Chief would go one way, she would go the other, and it was like the World Wrestling Federation.
She was first appointed to the board in the early 90s as police were under fire over several shootings of young black men.
Go away, Susan Eng! Go away, Susan Eng!
As chair, she pushed for accountability, ranging from their guns to their budget. At a time, it wasn't easy or popular to do so.
Sure, there's a few problems, but you can't paint them all with the same brush.
She pushed so hard that years later, it was found police had illegally wiretapped her phone.
We have evidence now that they even broke the rules under their own authorization, so who knows how far this went.
The police board told CBC in a statement she played a central role in advancing civilian oversight of policing, emphasizing accountability and transparency. Her advocacy went beyond the city. She played a pivotal role in the fight for redress for the Chinese Head Tax and Exclusion Act, persuading Via Rail to donate over 100 rides, creating the Redress Express, so that head taxpayers could travel to Ottawa to lobby Parliament. After Prime Minister Stephen Harper heard their message,
we offer a full apology to Chinese Canadians for the head tax.
more recently, she founded the Chinese-Canadian National Council for Social Justice, standing up against anti-Asian hate at the height of the pandemic.
Susan also sort of like keep reminding us that that is our job. That is our job. So that not only Chinese Canadians, right, as Canadian, as a country, we have a chance. We have a chance.
Aside from her many accomplishments, for people who knew her, she wasn't always serious, often cracking jokes with her friends over dinner.
She has such great sense of humor. You should have heard her laughter.
Laughter that never wavered, even as she fell ill.
Very few people are like Susan. Very, very few. You can spend your time taking care of everybody's feelings, or you start taking steps forward.
Now, Weingarten, CBC News, Toronto.
Our next speaker is an icon in his own right. He's one of the most recognized leaders in the Asian community. It really is like a greatest hits package of famous community leaders here today. He's a founder of the Chinese-Canadian National Council and Yihong Center for Geriatric Care. He worked with Susan for more than 40 years, improving access to culturally appropriate long-term care and social justice issues. Dr. Joseph Wong.
Thank you, Tony. It is good to see a lot of our colleagues here, and I believe many of you worked with Susan in the last 40 years. I'm not going to share with you what Susan did because I'm quite sure there are many, many others who are going to tell you the remarkable things that she has done in defending human rights, preserving social justice. I just want to let you know my own understanding of Susan. I know Susan for 45 years. She is such a courageous woman. She would not bend down under pressure. as you can see, facing a powerful police union. She spoke out. She was defending a lot of the rights of minority groups, marginalized in a community, and coming to see all that she did 30, 40 years ago, it is now standard practice. So she is ahead of everybody else. She's a pioneer, no question about it. But I would like to share some personal stuff that I have with Susan. So after the victory against W5, and Tony showed you the anti-W5 button, a lot of people, I was given a mandate from different anti-W5 committees across the nation to build up CCNC. And from a number of sources, I was told that Susan is the one that I should look for. So I called her cold turkey. When I was trying to let her know how good we are, in order that she would join us, she said, no, go to the meat part, okay? So in her heart, she must say, oh, don't waste your breath, come on. So Susan has one thing very important. She never wanted to say anything, one word that is not absolutely necessary. She goes to the heart of the issue. So she joined CCNC. She was with CCNC for quite a number of years. And again, when I started building a nursing home for Chinese Canadian seniors and serving them in their language and in their culture, the first person I thought of was Susan. Susan joined us. She appeared in the first press conference. She was also chair of EHONG's board. At the time, we initially began the journey as Chinese Canadian Nursing Home for Greater Toronto. If you know this name, you'd show your age. We got from CIA a charitable number in record time. You won't believe it. It was 9 days. 9 days. I challenge any of you who could do it in this record time. And many of you do not know, she was a remarkable tax lawyer in her own time. After each budget is out, everybody was rushing to invite Susan to be interviewed on air, in the newsprints, and everywhere. She was a remarkable woman, excel in anything that she wants to do. In the last 2 to 3 years, I talked to Susan 2 to 3 times a week, either over the phone, WhatsApp, emails, whatever. She was in her sick bed. But every single time, we talk about her mom. She knows that the day would come and her mom should be properly cared for after she's gone. That's how Susan would live her mom and take care of her mom for a long time. 我想講幾句中文啦，我即係響Susan 臨走之前嗰2、3年咧，我一個禮拜肯定同佢通2、3次電話，唔係關於佢嘅病，係關於話點樣我可以幫佢哋手同佢一齊去照顧佢媽咪。佢一個好孝順嘅人。So talk about filial piety, talk about the virtue, talk about a courageous woman who bravely defended the rights and social justice of a lot of groups, marginalized groups in the city. She still has this soft heart. It is a virtue of the Chinese culture, fully expressed in Susan. And Susan's mom is here. I want to pay tribute to her, bringing up Susan to what she was, serving so many people in Toronto. I just want to say that the friendship between Susan, you saw very few pictures, Susan and me together, because we were so busy people. We don't have time for each other. Forget about it. We get down to business, and that is Susan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. I think Susan's most impressive accomplishment was getting the CRA to respond in 9 days. I changed my mind. We now have a video message from the Honorable Bob Ray, who was ambassador to the United Nations, is in New York. And you know, if you've been following the news, he's been a little busy this week. Mr. Ray was the former Premier of Ontario, and he was the one that appointed Susan to the Metro Toronto Police Services Board.
It's my great honor to pay tribute to my good friend Susan Eng. I came to know Susan very well in some of the battles of the 80s and 90s, and when I think of her, I think of what the philosopher said about courage. He said that the most important virtue was courage, because courage was what made all the other virtues possible. And I think Susan's life was a life lived in service and lived in courage, and made a tremendous difference to civil liberties in this country and in our city and in our province. She was fearless in her determination to deal with very, very difficult issues. At that time, many of those issues with us still. She did a tremendous job on the Police Services Board, and I'm very, very proud of having appointed her, very proud of the work that she did. I had the great pleasure of working with her on other battles as well, in particular on the head tax issue, where she was in the forefront, together with my good friend Joseph Wong, in making sure that we did justice to those people who were discriminated against in their desire to come to Canada. Her advocacy, not only for the Chinese community in Toronto and in Canada, but for all people, was extraordinary. And she went on to serve with great distinction with CARP, the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, an organization with which I know that will have a more a closer relationship in the time to come. I send you all my best to the mayor when I was there, my dear friend Olivia, to Joseph, and to all of you who were there. Arlene and I are sorry we can't be with you. You had sessions in full course this week and next week. I just want to say once again how much Susan's life and example should mean to all of us, and how much your friendship and dedication meant to me and continues to mean to me and to Arlene. So I send you my very best wishes, and I'm always going to be thinking about the courage of Susan Eng. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Ambassador Ray. Our next speaker is the chair of the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, who worked closely with Susan over the years, and from what I remember, also made history as the first Black woman cabinet minister in Canada, the Honorable Zanana Akande.
Thank you very much, and let me first apologize for creating a bit of a disturbance coming late. We're not all safe all the time, and I was involved in another issue this morning. I was first introduced to Susan by Ann Wallace. Ann Wallace, some of you may remember, was involved in starting a magazine that dealt with the issues, the interests, the focus, the background, the history of women of color, all women of color. And so it was everyone except our Caucasian friends who that this magazine was about. And Anne said, you must meet Susan Eng, she's brilliant. She didn't tell me that she was as young as she was, though. And I was amazed at the conversations we were having and the distinct way in which she spoke and the determination she showed to right the wrongs, all at the ripe age of 20-something. I must admit, she had me floored for a while. I kept asking, and where did you get these ideas? And where have you been expressing these ideas? And she told me about the incident at school where they suggested that she become a secretary or work in an office. And it reminded me that so many women of color had been misdirected into lesser positions. And I must say I fell in love with Susan immediately. I thought, here is a person that we must nurture, that we must encourage, that she could lead the fight, because God knows we were fighting in those days. But you know, it was Bob Ray who had appointed her as the head of the Police Service Board. And those were the heady days when the workings of people like Susan would be well received. And so we were encouraged by that. We were encouraged when she asked for accounting every time the police used their guns. We were just, our cabinet meetings sometimes turned into sessions where we were more excited than we should have been. And I guess some of the civil servants were wondering what we were doing in there. We remember after we became friends and there were issues with the police that came to me because I was in government and came to others, I would phone Susan. I'd say, you know, I've said this and I said that. Remember, she was almost 20 years younger than I was, and she would say, you should remind them of this, and you should remind them that they have said this and such a date. And she would remember the dates and the times and the things they had said. I did not come here today to lie to you. She was younger, but she led me so many times when I was feeling discouraged. Susan was a tremendous leader and a big help. And any time we said something wrong or our community did something that she didn't quite agree with, she'd find a way of feeding the information to me and others that she knew to say, perhaps if you did it this way. And we would consider her advice and often follow it because she had an automatic sense about leadership. And she also had a gift about understanding human beings and human feelings. Many of you will be able to read and to talk about what she did as a leader. But as so many people talk about leaders, they forget, because it's not obvious, that they were also human beings. And I have to not trivialize Susan, but I have to say she was a great friend. She was someone who remembered that you were a person, and when something had happened in my home, when my husband died, when the children were sick, I'd get a phone call and she'd say, do you need anything? I'd say, what are you calling me for? You don't have time to do anything. Well, I can send it up by cab. How are you? And I mention that not to trivialize her, but to say, as we walk this walk of determination, as we push for our rights, as we demand that we get the respect we deserve, as we take our place in the professions and in the roles of government, as we do all that, let us all remember we're people, and we need to support each other in this strife. Susan remembered that. We all think that possibly her death was one of the worst things that could have happened, but I think that the worst thing that could have happened would be never to have had her, never to have had her example, never to have understood her humanity. Aren't we all lucky?
Thank you for the thoughtful words, Minister. It's great to hear one OG civic leader talk about another OG civic leader. It was great insight. We'd like to welcome Gary Wong. He's a member of the Eng Sui Song Benevolent Association, of which Susan was also a member.
Thank you, Tony. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gary Wong. I'm a member of the Eng Sui Sun Chinese Benevolent Association, and I'm also a lawyer and a partner at the law firm of Corman & Company here in Toronto. On behalf of the Eng Sui Sun Association, and as many of us are gathered here today, I would like to pay tribute to Susan Eng, who was a longtime supporter and leader of our association and our community. There are not enough words for me to describe our sincere gratitude towards the impact that Susan had on me personally and to many of us that are gathered here today throughout her life. Susan was an intelligent, remarkable, and a strong woman of integrity. She was a vibrant and compassionate defender of the weak and underprivileged of our society. She was a true beacon of justice and fairness for all of us. I can clearly recall the first time that I actually met Susan. At that time, I was a very young student at the University of Toronto, and I had, like many of us, I had no clue of what I wanted to become or do in the future. I had accompanied my mother to Susan's law office at Blaney McMurtry, and I remember that even though Susan was extremely busy as a partner at one of our major law firms in our country, she actually took the time to meet my mother and personally notarize some legal documents for her. And all of this was because my parents and her parents were members of the Eng Association. That was the person Susan was, giving back to our community and providing an inspiration to me to become the lawyer that I am today. When she was announced as the chairperson of the Metropolitan Toronto Police Services Board, I was very proud of her accomplishment. And I clearly remember thinking to myself, how amazing is this? We now have a female member of a visible minority, let alone a Chinese Canadian, now the head of the Toronto Police Services Board. Amazing. Very, very cool. Throughout her life, Susan demonstrated a deep commitment to our society, her family, and our communities. The great contributions that Susan made to both the mainstream and the Chinese communities are still felt and evidenced today, as by all those that have spoken before me here today. Allow me to please take this opportunity to highlight Susan's close relationship with our association. It further demonstrates another good virtue of hers, being a good daughter and working hard to preserve the pride and beauty of our Chinese heritage and culture. The Eng Sui Sun Association was formed and established in Toronto over 100 years ago. It was formed by members of the Chinese community who share the same last name, surname of Eng. And the original purpose of the association was for members to assist each other and help new Canadians to our country integrate into Canadian society. Susan's beloved father, Mr. Tong Fong Eng, was one of the founders of the association, and as of today, we carry on this tradition, this important tradition of maintaining our pride and unity among living descendants. Susan played a very large role in this. She had never, even though she was very, very busy with her professional and public life, she never ever missed an event that was organized by our association. And even during her retirement, she continued to endlessly volunteer her hours to the actual association, which we all are appreciative of. All directors and members of our association respected and admired her interest, enthusiasm, and participation in various projects. Her dream was to see our association thrive and grow. Susan's departure has left a very large void, and she will be deeply missed by all members of our association. But we will go forward, and we will remember her as someone who was an intelligent, strong, much loved, and much respected person, an inspiration and a role model for all of us here today. Please rest in peace, dear Susan. You will be deeply missed, but never forgotten. Your radiant spirit will live forever in our hearts and minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you for carrying Susan's dad's legacy forward at the Eng Association. I just want to read a brief message from David Naylor. He's the President Emeritus of the University of Toronto. He says, I greatly enjoyed working with Susan on the Governing Council of the University of Toronto. Among her varied contributions, Susan served for a number of years on the Executive Committee. As President, I therefore had many opportunities to see her in action and be the target for some of her tough questions and nudges. She was also insightful, constructive, and unfailingly straightforward, but also warm with a wicked sense of humor in a social setting. By any measure, hers was indeed a life worth celebrating, and also one that ended much too soon. I deeply regret that I cannot be there. Thank you, Professor Naylor. Now we'd like to show you a special video presentation produced by Keith Wong in collaboration with Enzo Ho, a grade 11 student from Richmond Hill. Thank you, Keith and Enzo. Oh, you're still going?
One of my responsibilities is to try to get some of the changes that we need in the retirement income system as the minister said, we heard them, but to bring some kind of coalition together that allows us to increase the weight of our voices. And in that regard, I'm not an outsider to the issue that you're raising today, but I hope that I'm a capable ally in seeing that we get some kind of change done in a very important area.
Thank you for that beautiful video presentation, Keith and Enzo. I've never actually seen Susan's baby pictures before. I always thought she came out fully formed, but it was a great presentation. Our next speaker is another historic change maker. She, appointed in 2021. She is the first Chinese-Canadian federal court judge. Should have been sooner, but 2021 is good. She also worked with Susan on the Chinese head tax redress campaign, where she used my wife's grandfather, Shak Mak, as the chief plaintiff all the way to the Supreme Court. Thank you, Justice Avvy Go.
I have to start with a disclaimer. I'm here to speak on my own behalf and not on behalf of the federal court. Anyways, I can't recall the first time I met Susan actually, but the first time I organized an event here at the City Hall was for Susan. At that time, I was the clinic director of the Chinese and Southeast Asian Neo Clinic and also president of the CCNC Toronto chapter. And Susan just got appointed as the chair of the Police Services Board, the first and thus far the only Chinese Canadian to get the appointment. And while I didn't know Susan well, I was elated by her appointment because of her reputation then as a strong advocate of civilian oversight of the police. And I decided to host an event to show the community support behind her. So I'm very grateful that my small gesture of solidarity helped bring about my over 30 years of friendship and allyship with one of the most brilliant persons I've ever known. And whether it was the redress for the Chinese Head Tax and Exclusion Act or the nipper-tipping incident, Susan would dedicate herself fully and work collaboratively with others on social justice causes that she chose to work on. And Susan and I are part of a small group of like-minded shit disturbers on the Signal platform. We call ourselves Dinner Pal because our favorite pastime is to get together over a meal. And one time we had a cook-off at Susan's, and the picture, you saw one of the pictures there, where every one of us, except for me, brought a dish cooked with an Instant Pot, and we strategized over everything from how to handle a raw chicken without touching it with your bare hand, to how to eliminate the growing inequities in our society. I also recall our dinner at Chinatown to discuss how to pursue the redress campaign with the then Harper government, when Susan just casually came up with the idea of getting Via Rail to donate tickets to have all the surviving head taxpayers and families from all across country to Ottawa for a protest, and she dubbed it the Redress Express. And classic Susan fashion, within weeks of that dinner, she already got Via Rail to donate 200 tickets for the Redress Express. And on top of that, she also got the CAW Social Justice Fund to give us $50,000 to cover the cost of the logistics. A few years back, I was one of 3 people who wrote letters to nominate Susan to the Senate. Canadians often call the Senate the chamber of sore second thought, a place to hold elected officials to account. To Susan, these were not sound bites, but ideals that she believed in. And to this day, I don't understand why she wasn't appointed, because if she were, she would have been one of the best senators we've ever had. And just a few months before she passed, a group of us were putting together a letter to nominate Susan to the Order of Canada, another honor that eluded her. I know it's too late to get that honor for her, but since the mayor is here, I should mention I don't think it's too late to get a street named after her. And Susan spent a decade, well, more than a decade, as we know, like, you know, I'm not the first one, like several people mentioned that, to push for police accountability. Her fearlessness and effectiveness made her a target, yet she persevered. So in my mind, it would only be fitting that we honor Susan by putting her name on the street that borders the police headquarters and let her spirit watch over the police and make sure that they continue to serve and protect the public within the boundary of the law. So, while many of you may remember Susan for her intellect, integrity, commitment to justice, I would like to remember her for her laughter, her love for her family, friends, and food. And the last exchange I had with Susan on Signal was about the next time we'll get together for another meal, when her appetite returned, and she responded immediately with an emoji of herself carrying an oversized fork, eager to tackle the next big meal and the even bigger challenge that faces all of humanity. So I will always keep that emoji on my phone and that image of Susan with me for the rest of my life. Thank you.
Susan Eng Boulevard, that has a nice ring. Thank you, Justice Go. Our next speaker looks remarkably like the last speaker because she's a big sister. Former CCNC National President, co-founder of the Chinese-Canadian National Council for Social Justice. She describes herself as just one of Susan's dinner pals, but she's much more than that. She's literally the glue and driving force in the community, working with Susan hand in hand over the years. Amy Gill.
Thank you, Tony. 伯母，我喺度啊，我係婷婷啊。今日我哋好多人都喺度，因為我哋個個都好尊敬 Susan， 同埋我哋個個都想多謝佢為加拿大做咁多嘅貢獻，同埋多謝你伯母養大 Susan， 等我哋個個人都可以得到佢嘅貢獻。多謝你啊，伯母。The other day, I was walking from Chinatown east on Dundas Street, and Susan came to mind. last dinner, pals dinner with Susan was at Walk Theory near Spadina at the end of May when Susan was as good humored as always. Susan supported art and Canadian artists and designers before it was a trend. She invited me to the Art Gallery of Ontario, local theater production, and even her house, where she brought in a local fashion designer to showcase her work. She was wearing John Fluperfork shoes before Bonnie Henry was doing so in Vancouver. At the now closed Uncle Tetsu Cafe closer to University Avenue, Susan found the Japanese servers dressed as French maids as hilarious. Regardless of the setting, Susan was always authentic, fun, genuine, and witty. My walk also took me back to the first time I met Susan in her posh law office at Young and Queen in late 1980s when I first joined CCNC. And you know, Susan was tall, incredibly fit, and had a very strong presence. We were a small group of women in number and size trying to get her support for a women's issue. From that first meeting, I learned about Susan's principled stand for social justice and her ability to encapsulate a complex issue in a word, in a single phrase. And I also knew I had better always be prepared for Susan's hard questions because she did not suffer fools. Susan reminded us at CCNC that politicians are more inclined to respond when we back up our positions with numbers. With amazing strategic thinking, Susan was the first to come up with the idea of conducting a national poll during the pandemic to gauge Canadians' attitudes towards Chinese Canadians. The poll results drew national and international attention immediately for revealing the deep and entrenched anti-Asian, anti-Chinese racism in Canada. In no small way, Susan pushed the federal government to formally recognize anti-Asian racism in the federal anti-racism strategy. Susan was principled but pragmatic. It was not uncommon to get Susan's very short and quick responses like, "Don't waste your time. Stay away," when I reached out for advice regarding potential engagement opportunities when she didn't think worthwhile. On the other hand, Susan was always generous with her time for projects that engaged young generations, which is why the idea of archiving the history of resilience and activism of the Chinese Canadian communities piqued her interest. Merely a week before she passed, she was communicating with me through Signal about the Archives project. She again reminded me the importance of helping young activists grow and succeed. It shall remain a regret in my life that we did not get to hear Susan to tell her story on video about how she did it so seemingly effortlessly. Therefore, I'm committed to working with my fellow fans of Susan, there are many up there, to ensure that her brilliant mind will continue to affect positive system change by documenting and archiving her accomplishments so that the public can access, so that the younger generations will know and learn from Susan. Thank you, Susan. Your guidance, advice, and infectious laughter will always be with me beyond Dundas Street. Please rest in power. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for continuing to tell Susan's story. Our next speaker, Dr. Alan Lee, is one of my personal heroes. This really is like a greatest hits package of community leaders. He's the founder of the Asian Canadian Aid Services and Community Alliance, former CCNC national president. He worked with Susan on equal marriage and redress campaigns. And of course, he's known for his groundbreaking research into marginalized communities. Dr. Lee.
Dear friends, honest guests, Bamo, Susan's family, I'm very honored and privileged to have this opportunity on behalf of myself and my husband Keith to share some of our memories with Susan and pay tribute to Susan. I first met Susan in the early 1990s when I first became involved with the Chinese Canadian National Council. So even though Susan's only a few years older than me, she was always a larger-than-life figure. 其實佢係我嘅偶像，係我嘅女神嚟嘅。You know, not only because she was tall in stature, she is actually one of the most elegant, stylish, articulate, and gutsy women who I've ever met. And my first impression of her, of course, is when she stood up and more than held her ground against fierce opposition from the institution dominated by white men. It must also be something about gay men and strong women because I immediately become a fanboy. And in those early days, I was actually quite shy and quite intimidated whenever I'm in the company of Susan. But the first time I saw her skills up close was a couple years later when I was the president of CCNC. And I had the pleasure of inviting her to be a trainer for our anti-racism advocacy program, where she shared her media skills and insights with the younger generation of activists, as Amy talked about. It was then when I discovered that the Susan I have admired from afar, that I always held in awe, is actually much more down-to-earth, personable, and incredibly clear and easy to get along with. She's always connected her advice to community context while never losing sight of the bigger systemic and political picture. But my personal connection deepened with Susan in 1996 when Gay Asians Toronto launched a campaign against a homophobic article in a Chinese tabloid titled, "Do People Afflicted with Homosexuality Deserve to Have Pride?" The mainstream Chinese media often use so-called traditional cultural values to justify homophobic portrayal. And we felt strongly that our own cultural communities' leaders must speak up to support the issue. Many were hesitant, especially those with church ties. But when we approached Susan, she lent her name immediately, without hesitation. She became one of the most high-profile Chinese Canadian leaders to join us, and her support was pivotal. The campaign eventually won a full apology and retraction from the Chinese press, which was recognized in our community as a historic turning point, our equivalent of the anti-W5 movement. Not only did Susan stand with us, she also offered advice on how to frame the victory so it could have the most lasting impact. We became much closer friends during the Head Tax Redress campaign when Susan organized the Redress Express that Avvy talked about. She asked me to help care for the seniors traveling across the country as the doctor on the train. Throughout the campaign and during that journey, I saw not only Susan's brilliant strategic leadership, navigating government, media, community partners with skills and flair, but also her caring side. She genuinely thought about all the details, ensuring all the seniors traveling across the country were comfortable, supported, and able to participate meaningfully and fully. That combination of strategy and compassion was Susan at her best. And her caring heart extended well beyond the community she was most directly connected to, as we heard, a lot of times. I wanted to share a story that probably none of you know about. And one of the most powerful moments I shared with her was during the planning of the International AIDS Conference in Toronto in 2006. Our organization, the Committee for Accessible AIDS Treatment, is a coalition of organizations serving racialized and newcomers living with HIV. We were successful in getting 12 presentations approved at the conference, so that was a big deal for international conference. So we launched a training program to support people living with HIV to be the presenters at the conference. But many of the peer presenters were not trained academic researchers, right? And they were quite intimidated, but we believed in the voice of the community, so we wanted to make sure that we provide the capacity building for them to be able to present for their own lived experience. And we got Susan to be one of the expert trainers for that training. We know that she's gonna ask very tough questions, so I was on the edge of my seat, you know, but we wanted the trainer to help bring out the qualities of the presenters. But she was really empathetic and patient and very skilled. You know, like a lot of the peers were trying to kind of pretend to be professional and trying to do the academic, abstract kind of thing rather than speak on their lived experience. But she patiently listened to them, and she skillfully pushed them gently until one of our Black women presenter living with HIV finally get fired up and speak authentically about her own lived experience. And then Susan applauded and told her, nothing is more powerful than being your own true self. I would never forget Susan's role in that moment. That Black person living with HIV, woman leader, later become one of our co-chair and one of the most vocal advocates in the movement. It showed her deep understanding of the impact of stigma, her compassion for marginalized communities, and her commitment to facilitate others to step into their own voice. So over the last 2 decades, Keith and I were lucky enough to walk part of life's journey with Susan through CART, where she helped us, you know, deal with our aging process, the reference group, and later as dinner pals. We shared meals, laughter, stories, but also moments of strategy, reflection, and support. In those times, Susan, our idol and icon, has become a dear friend, someone who made space for us, who valued our voices, and who let us see her humor, warmth, and kindness. For Keith and me, Susan's presence had left an imprint that we'll carry forever. She mentored us, challenged us, encouraged us, and stood with us. We will miss you fiercely. But when we think of Susan, we will remember her laughter at dinner, her sharp wit at a meeting, her unwavering belief that our communities, could rise stronger together. Susan, thank you for touching our lives, for being there, for showing up. We love you, we miss you, and you will always live in our hearts. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Lee. She did have a caring heart, and that's why Susan Eng Boulevard will soon be a reality. Peter Maloney has been a social justice change maker for decades. He's been a friend of Susan since 1984, when they both ran in an election for the same seat on Toronto City Council. I'm not sure what happened there, but they became best friends after, and he'll tell you more.
I'll tell you what happened. Olivia and Jack and the organization they had built for the NDP in Ward 6 happened. And both Susan and I failed to gain the seat. Dale Martin took it. It was the year that John Sewell resigned from his seat as senior alderman in Ward 6. And the Eggleton Conservative Liberal Coalition on Council had decided that Susan would be a good horse to put in the race for their side, knowing how strong the NDP was with the support of and the long history of elections with Jack and Olivia. And so I split off the gay community's vote, Susan split off the Chinese community vote, and Dale Martin came up the middle. That'll be my version of it forever, Olivia. So we both lost. And what kind of person who might well feel that I had destroyed her chances of ever sitting on city council, what kind of person then turns you into a friend for more than 40 years? That kind of person was Susan Eng. And I want to talk now less about her saintliness and her organization and her strategies, and more about Susan the person, whom I got to know over those 40 years on a very different basis. I mean, I could go on and talk about our advocacy with respect to the police and our respective communities and so on, but I want to tell you about the woman that I knew, and I give you an example of John, drawn from the Chinese community's astrology. You know, you've got this cycle of 12 years, and each represented by an animal. And Susan was a dragon, not surprisingly. And I, unfortunately, am a chicken. And chickens don't do much, you know, they flop around, they can fly a few feet, they peck at the ground, they peck at one another. So the prospects for chickens are not great, unless they have a dragon for a friend. And Susan was that dragon. And you've heard about her seriousness, her organization, her strategy. But what you haven't heard about is the gift that she gave all of her friends, the gift of support, of every time she was called upon by someone or knew someone needed something, she was there. Whether it was Zanana with sick kids or her husband passing, or anyone else, Susan was always available to support you no matter what a chicken you were. And I think first and foremost I would say about Susan was family. Susan was proudest when her grandmother and her mother and her sister and her sister's daughter were all together. And she was so proud of 4 generations being in the same room together. Mrs. Eng, you raised a truly remarkable daughter who was dedicated, as you well know, to family. And so the first and most important thing you need to know about Susan was she was all about family. As a friend of hers, Matthew, I've got baby pictures of you. Elizabeth, I've got baby pictures of you and of your, and the grandchildren. She writes to me, you know, that Rose has become a grandmother. And she shows me a picture of Mrs. Eng holding a baby. And it seemed to me that every niece and nephew that came along, there was a picture on my phone or in my email about that child. And she was constantly talking about the accomplishments of her nieces and nephews, and subsequently, of course, their children. And so that was one side of Susan, and it was more than just taking pride in family. At one point, Susan had as you can imagine, a very strong, powerful woman and a very attractive and fashionable woman, attracted some male attention. And I remember her at least 4 boyfriends that she had. They were all of a type, sort of tall, a little older generally than her, patrician in appearance. And when she was with those men and they showed her any kind of affection, it was like the dragon purred. Well, she finally met one who she collaborated with on a book, and she worked together with him, and finally, for the first time in her life and the last time in her life, she married. And that man lived with her in the house in Brunswick, and eventually he found a job, but the job was in Vancouver. And this was a big turning point for Susan, because it was go to Vancouver with her husband and continue their life together there, or stay with her family. And the choice was clear to her. She stayed with her family. And I remember being sent on an errand by Susan, as she occasionally did, to bring some paperwork to Vancouver to get her husband, who I knew, to sign some documents so that they could dissolve their marriage, mainly on the basis that she couldn't stand the idea of being away from her family. So that's the first and I think most important thing to know as the core principle of the way in which she lived her life was family. Second part is more fun. You've already heard about the dinner clubs and the lunch clubs and that kind of thing. Well, she was always organizing travel, theater, dinner. And so much of my life, when I've lived in Toronto, I've been in Ottawa for 10 years now, but much of the time that we were together in Toronto, we were constantly going out to various dinner clubs, and I'm sure that dinner to many restaurants. And she got to know the various cooks and personnel in the restaurants, and she was always greeted effusively, and the cooks would come out of the kitchen and chat with her and so on. You hear that she has these different groups of people that she goes out dining with. Some of her women friends, and she had many women friends, Carol, Avvy, Amy, Shoshona, I see a couple in the room, and that was one of her ways of networking and dialoguing and engaging with people and continuing friendships. Second was travel. And I never quite understood the difference. She never seemed to travel with family, as devoted as she was to them. She was always traveling with women friends or gay men. And the nice thing about traveling with women friends is you can share hotel rooms without comment. And the nice thing about traveling with gay men is that you can share hotel rooms without comment. And so, you know, and it's a very cash-saving way of traveling. And so Susan and I have traveled to Cuba a couple of times, to New York City for the theater and for shopping, to Hong Kong, to Shanghai. And I remember Shanghai particularly because it taught me what an intense traveler she was. She wouldn't let a second go by without doing something. And when I complained that it was too hot, I was too fat, and I didn't want to go out in the Shanghai heat anymore, she turned to me and she said, "You can rest when you die." So traveling was the fun part. I'm sorry, I've lost my place here. Food, Entertainment. Every winter she held the winter solstice party at her place. Many of you have attended there. Birthdays, I was always invited. Very often flew to Toronto or drove or took the train to Toronto and attended her birthday parties with family, and it was always such a privilege to be included as the only non-family member attending those birthday parties. Another thing that I remember about her was, despite the fact that we had gotten acquainted through politics and through the Urban Alliance on Race Relations and various other activities that we both engaged in, she had a disdain for party politics. And of course, that's my life, you know, party politics. I'm very much a liberal. Ran as a provincial candidate, and then I stuck a liberal label on myself whenever I ran municipally. Despite the fact that she disdained that, she continued to support me in my efforts, usually always unsuccessful, in the face of the NDP powerhouses. She supported me 4 more times after that first election in my efforts my unsuccessful efforts to get elected. She was coy about her age. I once suggested to her in an email that she was about to turn 60, and she claimed not to know what I was talking about. And I told her that sounded to me like denial, and she replied, "Plausible deniability if I divorce you as a friend." The last thing, or the last couple of things I want to say, I've gone on too long, but I remember a few incidents. One was, she was devoted to CARP as a vice president, and she wanted Justin Trudeau to attend one of their speaking events here in Toronto. And she failed the first time, but the second time she went up to the Hill and she literally stalked him. This was in 2014 and just before the 2015 election where he became Prime Minister, surprisingly. And she actually followed him to a men's washroom and stood outside the door in order to collar him and make him promise that he would attend the CARP function. Another was, why does it keep doing this? I should put that away. Take this one out instead. It's so much easier to manage. She had many gay male friends, including Alan Lee and his husband, Paul Chappelle, Michael Chan, myself, and she was as supportive of our efforts as she was of their efforts, the efforts in the Chinese community. Finally, she was one of the most pragmatic and practical people that I've ever met. Ideas may seem attractive at times, but you've got to know when to move forward and when to fold. And she certainly, regret though she might, she knew when to fold and when to proceed. And that was part of her enormous success in life. Thank you, Mrs. Eng, for giving us such a wonderful daughter.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Susan, of course, You know, it really was about love and family, as you mentioned. And so now we have the most important speaker tonight, Susan's sister, Rose Wong.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to see a lot of familiar faces in the room. I've accompanied Susan over the years to a lot of these events, so I'm familiar with all the work that she's done, followed her career, but I'm here to talk more about her family life. So Susan led a storied life, as you all have heard today. Her personal life she wished to keep private, to protect her family and friends from unwelcome attention. So I'm going to share with you some of my reflections on her family life and some of the early experiences that may have led her to some of the decisions she made in her life's work. She was born August 24th, 1952, to my parents, to our parents, my dad was 51, my mother was 21. The reason is our dad came to Canada in 1919 when he was 18 years old. But because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, he was not allowed to marry until 1950. So therefore the age gap between my parents. At an early age, Susan knew firsthand the struggles that my father had gone through, trying to run his business with limited English and limited knowledge of laws. So my father relied on her as the eldest in the family to translate, to review the documents, and to help correspond on any of these business and financial issues. She also witnessed my father's generosity. He sponsored a lot of friends and family from China and helped them settle in Canada. He was a co-founder of the Eng Association, providing a large portion of the funding to purchase the building that they operate out of today. So this early exposure to responsibility and to community activity shaped her deeply. When she was just 17, our father passed away. Overnight, Susan became the head of the household, looking after the financial and business affairs of the family, as my mother was a bit overwhelmed, having to raise 4 children on her own with limited English and limited job opportunity. So Susan took charge of the family affairs, but she guided us, her siblings, firmly but lovingly. She excelled in school and setting very high standards, and our teachers expected us to follow suit. But she was always there to provide guidance and support whenever we needed it. It was Susan's courage, discipline, and leadership that enabled our family to survive and thrive through this difficult time. She instilled in us the importance of family as a source of strength. We, as a result, found courage to pursue our careers and dreams because we knew that we had a family safety net that would catch us if we were to falter. Later, when we all left for university and started our families, she insisted that we still gather as a family for Sunday dinners. And we did this until my mom turned 80, so we did it for a number of years, every single Sunday. This tradition has kept our family close, and it gave us our extended family, my children and our grandchildren, a chance to share every Sunday evening with the family. Professionally, as you've heard, Susan defied every limitation on her. She was told that being a lawyer was not for women, and especially not for Chinese women. Yet, she graduated from Osgoode Hall and was called to bar in 1975, and went on to become a corporate tax partner at Blaney McMurtry. Through her example, she showed that women and minorities could claim a space in places where they were excluded before. Her advocacy work was equally groundbreaking, as you've heard, and so she carried the memory of her father having to keep the head task certificate on his person for the fear of being deported. And as you have heard, she managed to use that early experience to make the changes that she has made. So I have attended a lot of these events with her, and for me, I realized how fearless she was in everything that she did. And my son called her, used the metaphor as a wizard to describe her, and I think that a lot of things that she did was like magic, the things that she accomplished. When I think back on some of the family life, my daughter described her as a light. It's just sort of shone warmth and love to whoever she was dealing with, her friends, her family. She was a very compassionate person. So I guess in closing, I want to say this too. I think she made her life, in closing, Susan accomplished in her lifetime what most of us could only dream of. She essentially rewrote the history for the generations of Chinese Canadians before us. And through her trailblazing achievements, she has inspired women and minorities of our generation, and she leaves a lasting legacy of having created a better future for our children. Susan was the guiding light for our family, generating warmth and love. We are all inspired by her and are very proud of her. For me, Susan was my guardian, my big sister, and my best friend. I miss her every day.
Thank you, Rose. We can see where Susan's love for family and steel came from, especially at the age of 17. Thank you for that insight. And thank you all for joining us here today. And thank you to the speakers who helped to celebrate Susan's journey. Just a reminder that there's a reception in the rotunda downstairs. There's cookies and drinks. There's a guest book. There's a keepsake card. You can go down and lobby Mayor Chow about Susan Eng Boulevard. On behalf of the Eng family, thank you for being here. Oh, just one thing, I've been informed that I invented a sibling named Victor. I'm gonna blame my scriptwriter. Susan's siblings are Henry, Hubert, and Rose. The star wishes to issue a clarification. Okay, we'll see you downstairs, and thank you so much for being here.